Well, welcome back to the Wild Globalization Project. Today we're talking about wild sex, demographics, and culture. And we're asking, how are human demographics wild? We threw in sex to get your attention. So really, how do the flows of populations and peoples, their languages, beliefs, their ways, drive our 21st century globalizing civilization? In the big picture, we're asking, what's going on? How does the world work? We're saying that history is evolutionary and evolution is wild. To recall, the Wild Globalization Project is wondering if civilization's life world might not work more like a black box, what modern physics calls a quantum entanglement. So think of rush hour commuters moving in and out or around a modern global city every day, say London's or New York's 1 million commuters, or the 25 million who ride New Delhi's metro. See their faces, their manners and dress, or listen to them chat about their lives and family, their dreams and fears. If you could see or imagine all those scenes and folks all at once, what would be your sense, your impression of this human race? We're interested in how the human race flows like a wild confluence of rivers. Today that means 7,000 indigenous peoples and languages, 195 nations, 10,000 cities, and now 8 billion of us roaming the earth. So wild sex, demographics, culture is part of the mix of YouTube talks that include wild ecology, technology, economy, governance, and wealth. We can observe how human populations are wild and have been wild forever. For example, new genome data suggests that everyone on the planet today, all 8 billion of us, evolved from just a few thousand souls who lived and survived what's called a demographic bottleneck about 50,000 years ago. That's wild demographics and lots of sex for 50,000 years. Or look back at the 20th century. It opened with the promise of a new global prosperity with burgeoning populations and exciting technologies, automobiles, electricity, continental railroads, telephones. But then something happened. The century collapsed into global chaos, warfare, pandemic, and tragically genocide and environmental destruction. 70 to 100 million lost in warfare, 50 million in the 1918 global flu epidemic. But then the century's second half seemed to pivot. In spite of nuclear and Cold War threats, a re-globalizing order brought a rising tide of foodstuff abundance, the eradication of many diseases, more nations working together, trading, engaged in global commerce, and building new economic alliances. The Cold War ended. Still, the century's second half witnessed millions more lost to warfare and wild governance, cultural revolutions, and leaps forward. So the 20th century was really a seesaw battle between creation, new technologies, new economies, and destruction. Sudden and extreme breakdown of geopolitical and economic orders. So here's a hint for you. Here and also in our culture, tech, economy, governance, and wealth YouTubes, we'll ask if the 20th century wasn't really a response, a kind of reflex, to the 19th century's total upheaval of the old global order, what's called the Great Divergence. Agriculture had dominated for 9,000 years, 90 centuries. Then in the 19th century, human populations jumped to a shocking new order of industry and cities. Wild sex and demographics here will tackle two big questions. First, how did we get here from just a few thousand, 50,000 years ago to all 8 billion of us now? And second, what happens when the get here explodes exponentially from 1 billion in 1800 to 8 today? To remind, here's our provocative statement, quote, "Humans have not emerged from the wild. We are wild Homo sapien. The wild is happening right here and now. We've spread over the planet for 250,000 years. Our human nature has a history far deeper than smartphone intelligence and social media. We live in the throes of this quantum entanglement of ecologies, demographics and cultures, technologies, economies, governances, and wealth. To get here, we've relied on two unique human abilities: our critical thinking, or not, and our ability to love and care for each other and the planet, or not. This wild globalization inquiry is trying to get at things from both inside and outside the box, and to somehow think it all at once. How is this entanglement affecting the planet, changing it? But then how are we getting kicked around by it? So it all races ahead of our critical thinking, our ethical response, and our common sense. We're diving into it anyway because we're already being carried by it. So we're really just trying to learn how to swim, or maybe just stay afloat in these wild energy flows that constantly create and build, and at the same time break down and destroy the orders of life on Earth. Today in our 21st century, populations and human cultures continue to expand in numbers and economies. 8 billion of us and 100 trillion of gross domestic product, and that's just what we can count. And everywhere on the planet today, in spite of the same bitter conflicts, pandemics, unequal wealth distribution, everyone is healthier, with more food to eat, with longer life expectancies than ever before. So we're asking big questions here. We're keen on, as Yuri Levine suggests, quote, falling in love with the problem, unquote, rather than getting quick answers. In this talk, we're asking, what's going on with wild human demographics and cultures in the 21st century? What can we, or should we, do about it? So what is wild sex and demographics? Sex, violence, hypernatural human evolution. Demographics studies the flow and birth rates of populations over time. So we can ask, how are human demographics evolutionary? Sex seems obvious, or not. When American GIs came home from World War II, for example, they had babies, 80 million baby boomers. As economist and demographer Harry Dent observes, quote, when 80 million baby boomers, 10,000 a day, started buying starter homes in the 1970s, housing prices skyrocketed twice the rate of inflation. Birth charts tell us decades in advance when new generations of consumers will move through predictable spending cycles. If you remember nothing else, remember this: sex drives our economy. And that's precisely why economists have never figured it out and probably never will, unquote. And violence runs wild in the human story. As the American evolutionary biologist Beth Shapiro describes it, quote, by 700,000 years ago, lineages belonging to the genus Homo were distributed from Africa across Europe and Asia. Today, every Homo lineage apart from our own is extinct. Our ancestors killed off all the others in Africa, left Africa for Europe, where they killed off the Neanderthals, and then spread across the rest of the world, killing off whatever remnant populations of non-sapient humans they encountered. Within the last 50,000 years, our ancestors hunted, polluted, and outcompeted hundreds of species to extinction. They turned wolves into Boston Terriers and wild cabbage into kale, broccoli, and cauliflower. Some species survived their encounters with humans, but many did not, and all were transformed in some way. Living things today are as we made them, shaped in part by the randomness of evolution and in part by less random human intent, unquote. Globalizing civilization has emerged from wild human demographics. To survive, humans innovated scarce resources and began to change our world. They accumulated knowledge over 250,000 years and 10,000 generations. Humans became knowledge creatures. They were naturally curious and clever, but they were also driven, often in desperation, by an indomitable will to live. So they invented a new and different order of life. Humans represent the spontaneous emergence of a new order of evolution itself. Let me say that again. Humans are a new order of evolution. Their new ways sped up the pace of evolution. But this human version wasn't unnatural. It was endowed by nature herself. We became hypernatural, nature on steroids. To survive, humans did at least 4 things differently. First, they started to walk and run upright, what's called bipedalism. Second, with their hands free, they evolved opposing thumbs and digital motor skills. Third, their brains grew larger, called encephalization. Finally, with these new capabilities, they developed survival-driven teamworking and language. Knowledge-gathering intelligence expressed in language are the phenomenal differentiators of Homo sapien and the wildest, most radical evolutionary ploy ever ventured by nature herself. We survived in part by spreading over the planet. Humans are globalizers. We've taken over the planet, at least for now. Planet Earth, however, can strike back. Recall the demographic bottleneck mentioned a minute ago. The genome data tells us that humans have emerged from just a few thousand individuals about 50,000 years ago. Some ecological event or series of events triggered a devastating population loss. Most everyone disappeared. We all live today because of these few survivors. The bottleneck instructs how human populations, like the dinosaurs, are always at risk to nature's wild ecology, to climate, volcanoes, to solar storms or meteors. The Toba supervolcano eruption 74,000 years ago ejected as much as 190 cubic miles or 800 cubic kilometers of sulfuric ash into Earth's atmosphere, causing a global winter. Habitats would have been threatened or destroyed. In 1815, Tambora volcano erupted and triggered famines and typhus pandemics in Ireland and Europe. Our 21st century is not quiet. America's own Yellowstone threatens today. And because we've become entangled in global supply chains, we may be at wilder risk than we can know. Human population flows are wild, and we'll see in a moment how populations are as wild or wilder than ever. So wild 21st century demographics, cities and System D, millions moving to cities. In the 21st century, human civilization and demographics have gotten wilder, even dicey and dangerous. We are seeing war break out like volcanic eruptions, Afghanistan, Yemen, Ukraine, and now Israel. We see great financial crises, bank failures, hyperinflation, out of control government debt, and now energy chaos and global pandemics. And then, urbanization, cities. Most of us take urban life for granted. 80% of Americans live in cities, when just 100 years ago, only 15% of us lived in cities. And in just 2 more decades, around 2050, it's expected that 75% of the entire global population will dwell in cities. And it gets wilder. Every week, over 1 million people are moving into cities, mostly in China, India, Southeast Asia, and Africa. China is building 300 cities. In 2006, the planet crossed the 50% threshold, with more than half of the world's peoples now living in cities. So why are cities and urbanization so important? Physicist Jeffrey West of the Santa Fe Institute sums it up like this, quote, "Cities are the crucible of civilization. Urbanization has been expanding at an exponential rate in the last 200 years. Cities' impact on the environment, health, pollution, disease, finance, economies, energy, they're all problems that are confronted by having cities. The tsunami of problems and sustainability questions we are facing are actually a reflection of the exponential increase in urbanization across the planet." Unquote. So cities can look like this. This is Nairobi, Africa at night, a modern city. And then they can look like Nairobi's Kibera migrant neighborhood. In fact, two different civilizations side by side. Cities are at the heart of global economics and culture. So the stealth economy, System D. In this century, global cities and global labor move hand in glove, and they're both wilder than ever. So today, half of the 21st century global economy is, as Robert Neuwirth observes, quote, l'économie de la débrouillardise, or sweetened for street use, System D. This essentially translates as the ingenuity economy, the economy of improvisation and self-reliance, the do-it-yourself or DIY economy. It used to be that System D was small, a handful of market women selling a handful of shriveled carrots to earn a handful of pennies. It was the economy of desperation. But as trade has expanded and globalized, System D has scaled up too. Today, System D is the economy of aspiration. It is where the jobs are. In 2009, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, concluded that half the workers of the world, close to 1.8 billion people, were working in System D, off the books in jobs that were neither registered nor regulated, getting paid in cash and most often avoiding income taxes, unquote. So why are these millions migrating to cities? The System D economy is an emerging and spontaneous version of modern urban civilization. It captures the same perils above: disease, pollution, energy demands. But for its travelers, it also represents a new destination of risk and opportunity, freedom and possibility, and the chance to make things happen. Jeffrey West sums it up this way, quote, "Cities are also the vacuums and the magnets that have sucked up creative people, creating ideas, innovation, and wealth," unquote. And here's the kicker. Instead of happening over 150 years and maybe 6 generations like it did in Europe and America, it's happening in just 50 years and maybe 1 or 2 generations. In a nutshell, folks are seeking wealth and prosperity. They represent the omnipresent, emerging, grassroots global economy. Procter & Gamble reports that most of their new market share comes from their ability to penetrate the micro kiosks and street businesses of System D. And as System D folks gather in urban centers, they can also be seen spontaneously creating local micro-governances, micro-businesses, and neighborhood infrastructures for streets, water, and sanitation. And as we'll explore in Wild Governance, these people are trying very hard to avoid big government, control, and taxation. Half the workers of the world live here. Watch our Wild Economy and Wild Governance YouTubes for more on this. So what about the 21st century demographic reversal? Finally, wild human populations may astonish us even more because the, quote, too many people problem is now morphing into too many old and not enough young people. It's called a demographic reversal, and it's caused by negative birth rates. Still, by 2050, the global population is projected to reach 10 billion. However, as the graph here shows, the global population is actually aging. Notice the lower three white bars, ages 0 to 14. They're shrinking. A normal population pyramid would look more like the age 35 to 44 and then up. This is a big deal. Birth rates have been negative in Europe and Japan for some time. They're trending lower in the United States. China's birth rate may have gone negative 10 years ago. Their most recent census overcounted its population by as many as 100 million people. So what's causing this, and why is it a problem? Well, the answer is urbanization. When 1 million people move off of farms and into cities every week, they simply don't need or want as many kids. There won't be enough young people to pay taxes and take care of their aging parents and grandparents. It's a big deal for the economy as well. The recent 1990 to 2020 hyperglobalization was mobilized by the plentiful and low-cost labor supply in countries like China. That's changing, and quickly. So the 21st century faces a two-pronged demographic challenge. First, the total population will continue to grow. But at the same time, there won't be as many young workers for labor markets. And as Goodhart and Pradhan observe in their book, The Great Demographic Reversal, quote, the danger facing the global economy is precisely that economies that have dominated global growth are facing the biggest demographic challenges. And that means even if the world as a whole faces substantial population growth going forward, the economies that shaped global growth for the last 35 years are the ones which bear the brunt of the demographic winds, unquote. So 21st century demographics are advancing ahead of our governance, our common sense, and our ethical response. Moving and hiding in and between the planet's cities, we find human trafficking and child labor on a global scale. The International Labor Organization estimates that the 21st century global economy captures as many as 160 million children in its labor mills, half of those in hazardous work. System D may try to stay outside formal governance, but it's integrated into the high-tech, high-complexity economy anyway. In 2021, 75% of the cobalt in our smartphones or electric vehicle batteries was sourced from, quote, artisanal, slave-like open-pit mines in Africa's Democratic Republic of Congo. So how do we summarize demographics, wild demographics? Populations live in crisis, and yet, at least for now, humans are prospering. Here's some facts. From 1950 to 2020, the population-weighted average global income per person rose from about $4,000 to almost $17,000, or 300%. From 1960 to 2017, average global life expectancy rose from 52 years to 72 years. In China, from 44 to 76 years. In India, from 41 to 69. And even sub-Saharan Africa, from 40 to 61. Between 1990 and 2018, global infant mortality fell 55%. In Africa, 51%. In China, 91%. And from 1961 to 2017, the average per day food supply per person rose from about 2,000 calories to nearly 3,000 calories, or 38%. In China, it rose 126%. In India, 25%. And all those statistics are from a book called Superabundance by Marian Tupy and Gail Pooley. So listen on to our Wild Culture YouTube. It's the second half of our Wild Sex Demographics Culture Talk. And it tells the story of how wild populations, all starting from a small band of humans 50,000 years ago, now span the globe, live in the hearts and souls of 7,000 indigenous peoples and languages, in 195 nations, 10,000 cities, and now 8 billion of us roaming the earth. So if we piqued your interest, listen on. You can also go to substack.wildglobalization.com for transcripts, or our website, wildglobalization.com. That's it for now. Take care. It's wild out there.